class, welcome to week 14's lecture. This week we're going to be talking a little bit about differentiated learning, and I thought it was worthwhile doing a personalized lecture because you might hear about differentiation in the rest of your classes having to do with differentiation for learners that are struggling, and that's certainly something that's important. But just as important is differentiation for advanced learners, for learners who need additional challenge. You don't get a lot of that. That's my background, gifted education. So I always like to give my classes at least one lecture on differentiated learning for students who need a bit more challenge.
So first, let's discuss a few terms within class ability grouping, between class ability grouping, and differentiation versus tracking. In-class ability grouping means when groups are arranged according to ability within the same classroom. Groups may be grouped by homogeneous or same ability. That word homogeneous is just another word for the same, or heterogeneous by different ability. So for example, this would be if you're teaching reading and you want to group students together that have similar reading levels. All third and fourth grade reading levels together, maybe fifth and sixth and seventh and eighth. That would be fairly homogeneous ability grouping within the class. Heterogeneous grouping might be if you are teaching the same group and you're grouping third grade readers with seventh grade readers. They're usually very flexible and fluid, and they change. Between class grouping, ability grouping is a different kind of grouping. It's when groups are arranged according to ability level across classes. So this most frequently starts to happen in middle and high school. Honors classes versus on-level classes are an example of between class ability group. And these groups are usually homogeneously grouped, that is, same ability level. Differentiation means matching the given content with a student's interests, abilities, and learning styles through various instructional strategies. This differentiation is usually flexible in that it changes over time. It's not like tracking where a student goes into an honors class and stays there. And it often, not always though, takes the form of within classroom grouping. Tracking is a more permanent situation. It's generally not considered best practices today, but it still happens. It's when students are placed onto a track of courses based on their ability. And this usually utilizes between class ability grouping. So that means you'll go into a different class if you're an AP student because you're considered to have a higher ability in the subject. So this is an interesting cartoon. It looks like the teacher is really losing control of her class, and I like the caption here. Why aren't you differentiating? So as a beginning teacher, you probably think you've got your hands full with managing classroom misbehavior, focusing on content, assessing standards, testing, and so much more. And now you're probably thinking, what is this professor here talking about? The need to do something different. And does that mean something different for every student? Well, happily, I'm here to reassure you that no, differentiation doesn't mean differentiating for every student. And also, happily, you can become very effective at it over time. Um, and I'm going to teach you how to take the beginning steps here today. Think about this. Think about a time when you were lost in a class and your teachers didn't know it. Or think about a time when you were so bored in a K to 12 class and your teacher didn't do anything to challenge you. If you think about it and describe the experience, you might say things like, oh, that sticks out of my mind. I was bored out of my mind. I lost track of where we were because I was reading ahead. Or maybe I didn't understand that and I was crying and I was so upset and nobody even noticed. What could the teacher have done? Well, the teacher could have met you at your learning level where you were and could have differentiated the learning for you. Why should we differentiate? Because one size does not fit all. There's a lot of research on differentiation. Differentiation, when teachers use good differentiation, there are positive learning gains in achievement test scores, both short and long term. There's improved productivity, there's more creative achievement, students develop better study habits, they socialize better, there's more cooperation in your classroom, there's an improved attitude towards school and motivation, and there are negative impacts of poorly matched tasks. In other words, asking students to do something too hard or too easy. I am going to talk briefly about gifted students. I feel like you don't get enough in your classes about these students. You get a lot about students with disabilities, which is good. But just to touch on it, I hear a number of you talk, or I read in your posts, that basically it's the gifted student's job to teach other students. And I've been gently trying to sway you away from that because the research actually suggests that all students need to learn new things every day. And so you can see here um, a gifted student's Bill of Rights. It could be an all students' Bill of Rights. Every student has a right to learn something new every day. And I would argue that when you assign those advanced or gifted students as teachers, they really aren't learning anything new. They're teaching, and perhaps they're learning a teaching skill, but that's not their job. Their job is to be a student and to learn new content. So try to use that minimally in your classroom. Sometimes teachers will say to me, well, we have these gifted students. I think the solution is just to give them more work, double the homework, give them the same things, but just give them more work. And that's not what differentiation is. Differentiation for advanced or gifted students is not about giving them more work. It's about changing the challenge level of the work. So they should be doing the same amount of work as other students, but it should be more challenging to them. It's not about more work. So you might ask, is it fair to give different students different work, which is basically what differentiation is. I encourage you to look at this cartoon. There's a man there with a group of animals lined up, and he's given them a task, and he says, for a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. Well, obviously the penguin is going to have a hard time. The elephant's going to have a hard time. The fish in the bowl can't even get out of the bowl, and a seal and the dog. But who's going to excel? That monkey's going to excel, right? And so our education system is a little bit like that. Children have different talents, different learning needs, and when we give them all the same task, some are going to be great at it and some are going to fail at it. And so you have to differentiate to make the assessment fair or the content fair and the learning fair for everyone. So that being said, let's talk a little bit about differentiation. What does it look like in the classroom? Well, it looks like that you're consistently using pretesting, because in order to differentiate for students, you have to know where they're at in terms of their ability levels, in terms of what they know, in terms of their interest and learning styles. Now, I can teach a whole course, and whole courses are taught on differentiation. But since we have this one lesson, we won't be going into differentiation by interest or learning styles. If you're interested in that, I suggest you look it up and Google it because it's fascinating and really something that you can do in your classroom that helps motivate students. We're going to be talking about differentiation by ability. So meeting the needs of those students who have lower ability and higher ability in your classroom. So besides pretesting, you're going to see a decrease in the frequency of large group activities. What this means is fewer whole class activities because students are going to be working on different work and doing different things in different groups. You're going to have fewer big group activities. You're going to see an increase in small group teaching activities. So when I used to teach in Florida, for example, I had a language learning block and I would be working with a group. I would have another group at a headset table listening to an audio recording that I had made. I would have another group working on seat work, and they were all productively engaged in small group activities. Flexible small group learning activities. So differentiation does not mean that you track a child. It means that sometimes you're going to assess that child and he or she is going to lack certain knowledge or skills and might be in a group that needs more support. But the next thing that you do, he might excel at. And so you might move him over to the advanced group. So it's flexible. You're going to see an increase in individual alternatives. So instead of everyone just sitting there doing the same worksheet, you're going to have centers around the room where students rotate and complete activities. You might have differentiated homework based on what they're working on. You might have learning contracts that require students to complete different activities. One thing you should be aware of before we get into any more detail, though, is differentiation is not about creating individualized lesson plans for every child, simply because you don't have enough time to do that. It would be great if we could, but there are not enough hours in the day. So, how do you differentiate? Well, it's like 4 easy steps, and it seems easy, but the devil's in the details. And so when you first start to differentiate, what I tell people is to take it easy, do some simple differentiation and see how it goes and build up your skills. The first thing you're going to do is pretest for knowledge or skills that you're about to teach. So, for example, suppose I was doing a spelling test and I knew that on Friday I would give a spelling test on 10 words. Well, the very first thing I could do on Monday morning is to say, okay, we're going to take a pretest for our spelling. And I would call out those 10 words, and it would be ungraded, of course, because I haven't taught it. It's important. All pretests should be ungraded, and students should be informed that they're going to be ungraded. They'll be a little anxious at first, but they get over it pretty quickly once they understand it's not about the grade. Then you score the pretest and you set some type of target. So my target used to be 90%. So if students got 90% or better, I knew they had mastered the the spelling words. If they dropped below 70%, I knew that they didn't really understand how to spell most of the words. From 70 to 90, I'd say, okay, well, maybe I could work with them on the words that they don't know briefly, and they could move into the advanced group. So breaking the group, you're going to divide the group class then into 2 or 3 groups. Those that are struggling, perhaps, those that basically know a little bit, but they but they can get it on their own, and then the advanced students who already know it. So students who know very little, students who know some more, and students who know a lot. And then you're going to differentiate the lesson by content, process, or product, which we'll get into soon, and then you're going to assess the student. That's it. So, as I said, pre-assessments or pre-tests should be conducted prior to starting any new area of study. They're connected to the learning objectives. So, for example, my spelling test, the objective was to get a 9 out of 10 on the spelling test. And they're usually done at the beginning of a unit or a theme. At times, they are also conducted prior to the day's lessons. So, here are some examples of pre-assessments. In science, before beginning a unit, students will create a concept map showing what they know about an upcoming unit, such as space. In social studies, students can complete a brief multiple choice pre-assessment prior to beginning a unit on the Civil War. In language arts, students can indicate which novel they would prefer to read out of several choices. That's actually differentiation by interest. There are many different types of pretests. You can make up your own quizzes or questions. You can use textbook tests or quizzes. Many textbook manufacturers will make 2 versions of the test, for example. You can use A as a pretest and B as a post-test. Kindergarten and preschool teachers will recognize KWL charts, what students know, what they want to know, and what they learn. And these charts can be excellent pre-assessments to help the student teachers understand which students know and what students don't know. Asking students to bring in previous projects such as science fairs give teachers an understanding of their ability level there. Conferences with students, concept maps, lists and surveys, many more. Exit tickets are also great types of pretests. So if you're planning to start a new unit the following day, as students are leaving, ask them to write for 5 minutes about the topic, collect them, and that can be the basis for your differentiated grouping. Here's our KW lists and surveys. So tell me all the words that come to mind when I say oceanography could be a pretest. List the attributes of a Renaissance paintings. Name several types of land masses, etc. A concept map is an interesting pre-assessment. Here you put a concept in the middle and you put related words in the bubbles, or you give them in a word bank and they have to fill in the words and say how they're related. So this teacher is about to teach her students a lesson about uh, astronomy. So she wants them to see if they know how all these things are related to stars. So once you pre-assess and form your groups, it's time to think about what may be differentiated. In other words, you have to do something different for the groups. Well, you can do that in content, process, or product. So content, what is that? It's having different students work on different standards, having them work on different concepts. It's about what students will know, what they will understand and be able to do. So the actual content can be made more challenging or less challenging. You can also differentiate by process, using flexible groupings as we've discussed. Think pair share. You can use simulations, learning contracts where students agree to do different activities, tiered assignments. This is like the tiers of a cake where you have 3 tiers and they're all different. So you might have the tier at the bottom giving them more support and more scaffolding. And then as you move up the cake, giving them less so. Advanced students need less support or less scaffolding and more independent work. Graphic organizers can help with the process. You can accelerate work for advanced students or go slower for students who need more support. You can give them different materials. All of these, when you change the activity that's done, not the content, but the activity and the way it's taught, that's called differentiating the process. The final way to differentiate is to differentiate the outcome or the product. So instead of just saying everybody's going to do the same project, you can make one project harder and one project easier. These are all examples of different types of products that you might differentiate. Or you might give them different types of products as a project. Let's suppose I did a unit on colonial America. I could ask one group to do a timeline for their product. I could ask one group to do a display. I could ask one group to do a puppet show. And this also gives a differentiating by interest. So again, differentiating by content, to go back to the first one, you can give them different resource materials at different readability levels. So they could be studying the same thing, but you might know that one group only is at a 3rd grade reading level and another group is at a 5th grade reading level. When you give them different books at different reading levels, that's called differentiating content. You could give them audio and video recordings to help struggling students. That's also differentiating content. You could give the struggling students highlighted vocabulary words, whereas others have to find the vocabulary word and the meaning. That would be differentiating content. You could use charts and models, interest centers, vary the manipulatives and the resources, and give peer and adult mentors to struggling students or students who need to work with an adult for greater challenge. All of this is about giving them different materials to learn with. So it's differentiating content. Here's some things that you can do to differentiate process. You can do, they can learn through tiered activities, as we said. They can learn through interest centers or hands-on materials. So you might, for example, make the math lesson more abstract for the advanced learners and give struggling students more manipulatives. You can allow for working alone, in partners, triads, or small groups. And that's differentiating depending on the amount of support they need. So all of this now is differentiating products, tiered product choices, different kinds of products. You can model, use, and encourage the student use of technology within products and presentations. So you might have a group of students who are very advanced in technology, and instead of just doing a poster, they might be allowed to do a more advanced technology presentation. Sometimes teachers ask me if students will accept this. In other words, do the students accept the need or the fact that teachers will do something different with different students? And it's been my experience in my years of teaching that they are very accepting of differentiation. They understand the need for it when you explain it well, which is that we all have different learning needs and different talents. So we're going to do different learning activities to suit those differences. They tend to understand that very well. Sometimes the hard part is explaining it to the parents, but if you get the students on your side, that generally is not a problem either. So let's try a few and see if we can figure out if these activities are differentiated by content, process, and or product, because one of your assignments this week is to do something like that. Let's take number one. Mrs. B teaches a lesson on similes and asks students to complete a worksheet, which is not the final product. One of the worksheets is more complex. That is this lesson differentiated by content, process, or product. The lesson is differentiated by process because they're doing something different. You might also argue that it's differentiated by content if the standards are different that she's teaching, if the objectives are teaching, but we don't know that. So without that knowledge, we have to say it's process. Number two, Mrs. A teaches a lesson on metaphor, and after it is completed, allows some students who prefer artistic expression to create a painting expressing a metaphor, and allows others who prefer writing to write a poem using metaphor. This lesson is differentiated by what? Content, process, or product? By product, because the students are producing different outcomes, different projects. One's producing a painting, one's producing a poem. Number three, Mr. C teaches a science lesson and provides books on various topics, different reading levels. This lesson is differentiated by what? By content, because the materials she's providing them are substantially different by reading level. Remember, if it's materials or standards or objectives, it's content. If it's the way it's being taught, it's process. And if it's the outcomes or the project, it's product. So to summarize, here are some takeaways from this lecture. It's best practice to use differentiation. It's also best practice not to assign teaching duties to advanced or gifted students on a regular basis. Use differentiation. We know that differentiation is effective and has a lot of positive outcomes, and it may be used in regular classrooms to help struggling as well as high ability students. It doesn't mean you have to differentiate for every student. What I'd like you to try is to try this with something you know how to teach and you teach very well. and then maybe break the class up into 2 groups or 3 groups if you're feeling ambitious. Give them different work and see how it goes. So that's it for this week. I'll talk to you again next week.